Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. This is another Digital Dimensions webcast, and my name is Cody Armstrong. And today we're going to be talking about customizing CamWorks post processors. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into it. First off, why would you customize your post? Well, there are a number of different reasons. Not all of them are there, but those are the most common. You'll see number one, it doesn't run on my controller without some kind of an error, and that's a common complaint we get with post processors. I post from CamWorks, I run it out to my machine, I hit go, and it errors out. That's a common reason you have to make a change in order for it to run successfully on the machine. Um, it doesn't post code with formatting that I like, and that's actually a common complaint. I prefer to see the spindle come on before the work offsets, or I prefer to see my height offset, my coolant come on in different lines, and so I'm going to change it. I'm going to customize it so that it's more matching to my preference of programming. Um, it can also help the operator work better. So if I have a list of tools, if I have, you know, um, an easy way to navigate through the post, maybe it's, I separate each section, each tool into its own sections. I can break it down to make it simpler for the operator to read and also put more information there. Maybe it's estimated machine time, maybe it's the tools that are being used, maybe it's the work offset, but I can put a lot of information in the post that may help the operator or the person that's setting it up. And lastly, it allows me to optimize machine movements. And this is critical when maybe it's making an extra move between every tool change, and you start to realize after 1,000 parts, I'm wasting 10 minutes making this one move. Well, I can go into my post and customize it to do the moves that I see fit. Okay, so lastly, it allows me to optimize some of the machine movements. Now, getting into some of the details of post customization in CamWorks, there are two programs you're going to need, and actually, in reality, the only one you absolutely need is a universal post generator. Okay, the EC editor is nice, but the universal post generator you must have. It's how you compile a new post. The EC editor, however, is a great text editor for modifying post. It's really just a text editor. There's lots of them: Notepad, Ultra Edit. But EC editor is good because it's specific for post processor editing, and it has a lot of specific functions for that. Okay, so those are the two programs you'll need. They are on the CamWorks media. So if you have your CamWorks disk, if you go to your all programs, you don't see either one of these programs, pop in your CamWorks disk. You'll see it under optional programs to install. Okay, you'll see the Universal Post Generator. If you install the Universal Post Generator, it installs both of these. But it is an optional program. They're not on by default. So again, if you don't see these programs in your all programs menu, pop in your CamWorks disk, install those programs. Again, they're listed under optional programs to install. So we know we need either the UPG or the EC editor, but where would we use one or the other? Well, the UPG is a simple interface, and for the beginner, it's probably a good starting point. It allows you to start a post relatively simply with a couple of button clicks. You're not have to worry about compilation errors or even programming errors. Um, it's a very easy to use, simple interface. Okay, and so you can be up and running with a post processor that's custom relatively quickly. Um, but it has its limitations. And that's where we get into some of the more advanced concepts. If I'm trying to write if-then statements, I'm not going to be able to do that through the UPG, not simply anyway. If I want to edit things like the library file, if I want to do more advanced programming things, I have to go to the EC editor because the UPG just doesn't support it. But for moving things around, like I mentioned before, I want to get rid of this one code or I want to move this before this, the UPG should work fine. I'm going to give you an example of both. I'm going to start off with the UPG. We're going to create a basic post, and then I'm going to go through editing it and making some changes. But then I'm going to jump into the EC editor and show why I might go to the EC editor. What things can the EC editor give me that I couldn't do with a UPG? Um, the UPG is always used to compile, whether you're using EC editor or not. EC editor is just a fancy way of editing the source file that's used to create the post. Okay, um, but you always use the UPG to compile, and I explain that in greater detail later on in the webcast. But you are going to use the UPG no matter what. Okay, I don't know if I mentioned this, but the UPG stands for Universal Post Generator. So without any more details, I'm going to go ahead and get into it. What I'd like to do here is call up the software, and you'll see what I've done is created a very basic part. Okay, and I think it's a good idea to always start off with a simple part that kind of shows a lot of the common operations that you have. So maybe if you're always doing a boss feature, or you're always doing a face pass, it's probably in your best interest to include that in your test part. I'm calling this a test part. It's very basic though. The reason it's basic is I don't want to spend a lot of time looking at tons and tons of XY values. I'm most concerned with how the startup of it goes, how it ends, and the lines in between aren't as critical. Okay, so I always make a real basic part just to test my post for any changes that I might make. So this is the part we're going to be using to post out and to look at our code. Okay. Now, like I mentioned before, I'm going to start off with the UPG. And if I go into my Start All Programs, at the very bottom here, you'll see UPG. And again, if you don't see this in your All Programs, make sure you install it from the CamWorks disk. You'll see it under Optional Programs. And if I expand that out, I see both the EC Editor and the UPG. And I'm going to go ahead and launch the UPG. Okay. And this is the interface. Again, it's very friendly. It's very, it's not a lot of computer programming. It's simple in that sense. It is a bit of a different workflow, though. In the case of, an EC editor, for instance, I'm probably going to create a post from scratch. I'm going to create a post starting with a generic FNUC controller, and build on top of it with whatever features I may use. And I use FNUC controller as an example, but it could be anyone. Whereas if I'm working with the EC editor, chances are I was sent that file, maybe from Digital Dimension support. I called up and I said I need a post processor for a Fadal 4020, and the support rep sends me this post and the zip file. I open it up and I start editing it. Chances are I'm going to be doing that with the EC editor, and I'm going to go over an example of that later. But with the UPG, most of the time I create it from scratch. I start from a example post and just start building it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start a new post processor. Okay, file new. It's going to ask me what type of machine, mill or turn. In this case, I want a mill. I want it to be a FNUC based controller, and remember, this is just the base. And then I want it to be a Haas. We'll call it a Haas controller. Okay. Once I have that, I'll just hit OK. And now I've opened up the Haas source file. Okay, and again, because this is such a friendly interface, it's really just a bunch of buttons that allow me to customize it. But this is the source file that's used to compile to make your post processor. So, without going into too much detail, you'll see here I've got details like the machine name. If I had 5 Haas machines, I probably want to give it something else besides just Haas. Haas VF3, Haas VF3 number 2. I can give it a lot of different names. Getting into some of the meat of this, though, if I go to the header tab, I can set a lot of the default settings for how it operates. Do you want 4 decimal places for every single dimension? If I only want 3, I'll set it to 3. Okay, and right places mean places right of the decimal. If I wanted leading and trailing zeros, I could have those. If I have a machine that only supports I, J, and K for my arc types, I could specify that here. Okay, so there's a lot of setup options that are kind of specific to the machine and the details of the machine. I'm just going to leave this set the way it is. The only change I'm going to make is I'm going to allow it to do a full 360-degree move. Okay. Now I'm going to go to the next tab over, Miscellaneous. And I'm going to specify, I only want 3 decimal places for my N series. I don't want it to go N1, N2. I want it to go N0001, N002. My max sequence number, let's add another 9 to this, just so it'll allow it to go up to 100,000 lines of code, or just shy of that. And this is important most commonly when you're working with mold. If you really have a complex 3-axis part, or even 4 and 5-axis where there's lots of lines of code, you'll find that the sequence number actually resets. So you'll go 9,999 and then back to 1. And so if you don't want that, come in here, add another, and I could add another if I wanted to, make it 999,999, but that should be fine for this. Another common option, I'm not going to do it in this example, is sequence numbers by tool. And what that means is, N1 will be tool 1, and then you won't see another N number until tool 2. So N2 will be in the same line as tool 2. And it's an easy way to kind of break up the different tools in my post. Other than that, I'm going to go ahead and move on. Getting into some of the mill specific features, there's not a lot of details I'm going to go over in specific. Absolute and incremental, a lot of the times you want to control these from CamWorks. Work coordinates, coolant, these are all things I can control from CamWorks. That's why I'm not going to spend too much time going into them. Some obvious option, display tool offset. Those are things you're going to need to have on, but I can see specific scenarios where that may not be useful. Maybe not for milling machines, but laser cutters, things like that, where I may not need a tool offset. Getting into the interesting bit though, I have my mill sections, all really the same options. Do you want coolant on in UV cuts? Do you want it to be absolute or incremental in UV cuts or Z level cutting? So there's a lot of specific settings for specific operations in CamWorks. I'm not going to worry about changing any of these. Same thing for drill and tap. Do you want it to dwell? Do you want coolant on? All specific to an operation. G83 PEC cycles, G84 tapping cycles, so on. Where we get into the interesting stuff is some of the setup. Now, some of the setup is it allows me to make the user punch in a number in CamWorks that will end up in the post. Now, by default, you'll see it's prompting for program number and material thickness. But those are the only two. See how they're checked here? But if I wanted it to prompt for program name, maybe I have a naming series for all my programs and I wanted someone to punch that in, I could check this here. Okay. Operation number, date. There's a lot of information I could possibly add into this, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. But the setup allows me to establish things that are in CamWorks that I want to maybe punch in info for, that I want to also see in the post. So, getting into attributes, here's one of the big things that I find most users want, and that's the ability to right-click in CamWorks and insert either a optional stop or program stop. Okay, and I can do that by just checking Make Available in CamWorks. And now what it's going to do is it's going to create a feature that allows me to right-click on a toolpath and say Insert Post Operation and specify an M00 or an M01, an optional or a program stop. Now, the Sections tab is really where we get into the meat of the post processor. How things are defined, in what order, in what fashion. Do I like this before this, and so on. So a lot of the details you'll find, a lot of the customization in the UPG is done right here in this Sections tab. Now the way this works is in a source file there's many sections. There's rapid moves, cutting moves, drilling moves, tool defining moves, for instance, in a tool change. And so for all of that, they're going to have different sections. So for instance, if I click on tool here, you'll see a number of sections pop up below. Okay, initial tool change, initial preload tool change, sub tool change, and there's a lot of settings for those. So if I just click on one of them, for instance, initial tool change, you'll see the syntax for the source code pop up here. Now it's a little confusing at first, but don't let all the nomenclature confuse you. Tool comment is just that. It's a comment that someone typed in CamWorks for this tool. Okay, and just like you might assume, M spindle direction is just that. It's the M03 or M04 that I might get calling up, turning on my spindle. Okay, S is the spindle speed. T, tool number. M6, just like you might think, is the M6 command. And so I can begin to decipher some of these things, even though it's computer programming to a certain degree. It's not very complicated programming, so it's easy for me to alter. And so going through this a bit more, if I go to my miscellaneous sections here, you'll see my start of tape. Okay, start of tape is literally the start of the program, and that's why you'll see a % for your very first line. Okay, and then I get into my program number, O, and then the program number. Okay, and then I get into the actual specifics of the startup line. By the way, this is just what they call a safety line. Okay, cancels out all the previous commands that may have been up from an old program or from the last routine. Now, if I wanted to add to my safety line, maybe I wanted a different command in here, I could certainly just type that in. But you'll notice the nomenclature is very specific. It always starts with a colon T colon. Okay? Then most of the lines start with an N. And the reason for that is that's a number line. So it's going to add an N1, N2, or N, in my case, N001, N002. But if you don't want it to post with a number line, you can get rid of this N. For instance, I did that with both the program number and the very first line. I don't want N1 percent symbol. Okay? I just want it to say percent symbol, then my program number, then it can start with N numbers. Okay. Now getting into this in a little more detail, I'm not going to change anything just yet because I want to show how I can save it, compile it, view it in CamWorks, view the changes, and then come back and edit from there. So I've created this post, and let's just say hypothetically that I did some modifications to it and I'm ready to save it. Just like you might expect, hit the save button. I'm going to give it a name. We'll call it Haas Demo. Okay, so I call it Haas Demo. I hit save. That saves my source code. Now I need to compile it to create a real post processor. All I'm really doing here is creating a source file that's going to be used to compile to make the real post that I'm going to program to, that I'm going to program with in CamWorks. So that's my next step. I'm going to go to File, and you'll see here, Compile Source. Okay, and with that, you'll see it takes me to the default folder for the UPG, which is C UPG mil source, and in here you'll see all the different source files, including my Haas demo. Okay, so there's my Haas demo source. I just hit compile, and I get a message: post source compiled successfully. Okay, now it compiled, but where did it go? Where's the finished product? Right? If I go to that folder, let's just browse to it here. C UPG mil source. There's no Haas demo CTL file, and if you have any experience with this, CTL files are what I'm actually posting to. Okay, the library and the source file, these two files here, are really just used to make that CTL file. So it's not posting to the mil source. I need to find out where it's posting, where it's compiling all this and putting it. Okay, and to do that, I'm going to go into the preferences for the UPG. Okay, so file preferences. You'll see the pop-up here. I have a lot of details. The one I'm concerned with is CTL path. Okay, this is the path that it's saving your finished post processors, and this is important because if I'm making all these changes and then I go into CamWorks and it's not changing and I don't know why, I'd make sure that the place I'm actually looking is this path. It's easy to make a simple mistake like that and not be posting to the right place or not be pointing to the right place in CamWorks and not know that the things you're actually changing aren't being reflected. Okay, so it's important to know where it's saving your finished post. In this case, it's the C UPG CTL. So if I go into that, we'll go C UPG, here's CTL, and there is my Haas demo CTL and lang file. Okay, and we're going to get into this in the EC editor, but the post consists of multiple files: CTL, lang, lib, source, ATR, and potentially general files as well. Mil T32, general T32. It does depend on the post, and each file is necessary to compile. You don't need all those files to use the post, but you do need all of them to compile it. And that's why when you get a post processor from Digital Dimensions, it consists of many different files. And that's in case you want to open it up, change it, and compile it yourself. You have everything you need. So I have this post, the CTL file here. I'm ready to post to it in CamWorks. So calling up CamWorks, you'll see here I have this part. I have already got everything generated. Okay, so I have a pocket cycle and I have a drill and tap cycle. And I want to post using that one I just created. So to do that, I need to specify use this post instead of my default, and I do that in the machine. So I double click the machine, I go to the post processor tab, and here I'm going to browse to my post. Okay, I hit browse. Right now that's the only thing in there, so I'm going to hit Haas demo, hit open, and select. Okay, now when I post this code, I'm going to be posting it using the code that I created in the UPG here. Okay, so I'm going to hit post process, and we'll call it test part. That's fine. I'm going to save it to the desktop, and I'll run through it. I want to open this up separately so we can take a closer look. Okay, so I'm going to double click the test part. There is my code. Okay, percent symbol, then program number. Notice N001 instead of N1, N2. Okay, and then just going through some of this, you'll see kind of the format of the code. Here's my tool comment I mentioned just a moment ago. Spindle speed, spindle direction, work offset. And so now I can begin to decide, what don't I like about this? I'm scrolling through this quickly here. We'll go down to the bottom. Some of the drill cycles, for instance. Maybe I don't like the fact that M9 is coming at the same line of code as the G80Z1. Maybe I want that to come before this, just between this last XY value and the retract and cancel for the canned cycle. Maybe I want that to come before it. Well, that's one of the modifications I can make. And so this is kind of the process. Is you'll have the UPG up, you'll post out in CamWorks, take a look at the code, decide what you don't like, go back to the UPG and make those changes. So I just said, for instance, I want to display this M9 up above the G80Z1. Okay, so I'm going to go into my post. I'm going to find that line. Okay, now I know this is the can cycle. This is the end of the drill cycle. So if I go back to my UPG and under sections, you'll see drilling as a section. And if I click on drilling, you'll see all the different drilling sections, including in drill cycle. Okay, in drill cycle has, again, T colon, or colon T colon, N number, G80, G90, Z, operating rapid plane, which is a variable in CamWorks, and then my M9. And this is really what I want to get rid of. I want to move it up. Okay, so to do this, I'm literally just going to start typing in a new line above that one. Okay, so colon T colon, and then I can actually just cut and paste this M9. Make sure you get the open and close brackets. It's important. Okay, so M9. Okay, now I've made that change. I'm going to go ahead and save it. I have to recompile before I can test it. Okay, so I've saved it. Make sure you save it. It's an important step. Then I'm going to go back to compile the source. Again, I'm going to compile HOSDemo. And now, once I get this message, I can actually go back and test it in CamWorks. So now I'm going to go back to CamWorks. Now here's an important step. It's one of the things that just one of those odd things that works about CamWorks is you have to define the post processor again. I've run into this before. You have to go into the machine, and even though it's already pointed to it, I have to browse, hit HOSDemo, hit open, and select. It's just one of those things that has to refresh the CTL file, has to look at it again, and so I have to go back into the machine and look at it and browse to it once more. Alright, so once I've made that change, now I can post again. We'll just say, and we'll take a look at the code. So if I open up my part here, you'll see if I go down to the drill cycles, my M9 is now coming before the G80Z1 point. Okay, and it's important to point out, and I'm doing this across all drill cycles. Remember, it's drill, tap, in this case even countersink. It's going to call up now the M9 before the cancel for the can cycle. Okay, so that's kind of the workflow, the process I might take to make simple changes using the UPG to make modifications to my post so that it's formatted the way I might like it. Okay, so now that I have added that, let's go ahead and move on. Show one more example where I might use the UPG to make a simple modification. And if I go up to the top here, you'll see my safety line, G0, G90, G49, G20, Z0. I'd like to add a G80 canned cycle cancel to this as well. Okay, so again, I'm going to go into my UPG, and under the miscellaneous, you'll see start of tape. Okay, and in the startup tape is that particular safety line. So you'll see the same G0, G90, G49, G English metric, G20 or G19, and then my Z0. I want to add a G80 to that. So I'm just going to click in there where I'd like to place it, right between these two. You'll see the cursor. Then I'm literally just going to click the G80 button. Okay, and you'll see G80 get added to that line of code. Now, there's one important thing I want to do before I finish, and that is force it to show up. And that's using an exclamation point. When I use an exclamation point like that, it's telling it whether it's modal or not. Post processors support modal commands just like in the controller. Whether it's modal or not, I want you to show this G80. Okay? In other words, whether it's necessary or not, I want to show this G80. Okay? And that's why I put the exclamation point there. So now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and save it and again compile. Okay? And now I'm going to test this in CamWorks. So I'm going to go back to CamWorks. We'll browse to my updated CTL file. Remember, it's just overwriting the same one every time I make a change and compile it again. And now we'll post. And now, if I take a look at the code, you'll see a G80 is now in my safety line. Okay, so again, that's just the general process of making a modification and viewing it in CamWorks. Making a modification to my post, compiling it, and seeing how it looks in the posted code. So now that we've done that, I'd like to move on to another topic, and in particular, the EC Editor. Alright, so now that we've gone over that, I'd like to show you an example of using the EC Editor to get a little more advanced into custom programming your own post. And I might use the EC Editor where, the UPG doesn't give me exactly what I'm looking for. I'm trying to do something a little more advanced, something that I couldn't do in the UPG. So, to give an example, I have my same part up here. And what I'd like to do is, a lot of controllers have an option for what they call high-speed contouring, high-speed machining, high-speed contouring, a lot of different names for it. And the Fanuc-style controllers, it's most often a G5P or G5Q, some kind of command like that. And in my example, what I'd like to go over here is a standard Fanuc 6M. I'd like to add a G5P10000 to turn on this high-speed contouring option. The problem I have is it doesn't necessarily apply to all toolpaths. Okay, right? I don't want high-speed contouring on every single, especially things like countersinks or drill cycles. So it needs to be on demand. I need to be able to select it, turn it on when I need it, and then not use it, have it off when I don't. Okay, and what I'd like to do is create an attribute in the post that I can tap into in the CamWorks interface and tell it to turn on and off. And I'm going to turn on and off this high-speed contouring option. Now, working with the EC Editor is a bit different. I'm going to go ahead and call up the EC Editor. It's under my All Programs. See it right here, EC Editor. And I'm going to go ahead and open up my post. Now, what you're going to get, let's go ahead and delete these files, is a file like this. So you've contacted DDI support. They said, okay, I need a Fanuc 6M controller from Morrisseiki for CamWorks. Okay, and the support rep sends you something like this, MSRC 110. Okay, it's a zip file. What you're going to do is extract this zip file. Okay, I'm just going to put it in the post folder here. And you'll notice a post consists of a lot more than just one file. Okay, I have my CTL file, that's what CamWorks uses to post. But then I have all the files necessary to compile to make that CTL file. So I have my source file here, my library file here, my general T32, and these are all the things that I'm going to need to compile to create my own custom post. Now the first step is I got to open up the source file. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll just drag open, get that right, my source file. Okay, and the first step is I got to make sure it compiles successfully first. I want to be able to compile it, test it, and use it in this way that it is right now, just to see where it's at. Okay, before it can compile though, it needs to know where all its files are. So if I go into, you notice on the left hand side here it says library files. You'll notice that the library files it's looking for, this fanuc6m.lib, it's pointed to the fmil library folder. Okay, that doesn't exist on my computer. I need to tell it where that file really is. Okay, so I'm going to go into my cpost folder where it actually resides. I'm just going to copy that path, I'm going to paste that into this section of the source file. So I double click over here, it takes me to that section in the source file, and I can paste a new path in. Okay. Now I also have to do that for the include files. So you'll see include files here. I'm going to paste that path as well. But before it can compile, you must go through and make sure that the references that the post is looking for are there and are accurate. Okay, so those paths have to be right or else it will not compile successfully. So once I have that, I can go ahead and hit save. Okay, then I can try compiling. Now remember, like I said, you're still going to use the UPG to compile. Okay, so I have to go back to the UPG and go File, Compile Source. I'm going to compile this FNUC 6M. Okay, so I select FNUC 6M, I select Compile. If I did it right, I get Post Source compiled successfully. Okay, so now I can post to that. I can test it out. So I'm going to go into my machine and browse, and there is my FNUC 6M. Okay, in the UPG CTL folder. Remember, we pointed to that in the UPG options. So I'm going to point to that FNUC 6M. I'm going to hit open and select, and we can post out our code. So taking a look at this, let's go ahead and open this up. What I'd like to do is add that high-speed machining option just after the tool change. Okay, so before the spindle command, but after the tool change, I want to add the G5 P10000. Okay, and again, I want it to be an option so that when I turn it on, it's on, but it's off by default. Okay, and I want it to go, right in here. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and start by going back into the EC editor, and I'm going to open up the library file. And the library file, in my case, the general library file right here, okay, is where I define a lot of the attributes and calculation sections. Okay, so if you see attributes here, there's a long list of attributes, all different variables I can tap into, and then there's a long list of calc sections. Okay, all the necessary calculations for post processors. Now what I want to do is I want to add a custom attribute. Okay, and I'm going to call that custom attribute. I'm just going to find a random spot here to place it. We'll put it right about here. So what I'd like to do is add a custom attribute. First off, notice I'm commenting out a section. I just want to do that for my organization's sake. Now, by the way, an asterisk starts a comment out section. So notice I start with an asterisk, then a bunch of dashes, just kind of organizing things. And I'm going to create my own attribute. So I'm going to start with a name, adder name equals high speed, attribute type equals select, which means it's going to be a select box, attribute remark, just a note, so I'm going to say high speed machining. Okay, then attribute select. And what this option is do you want it to show up in the mill part setup options, or do you want to show up in the individual toolpath options? So in my case, I'm going to select no, I want it to not show up in the setup, I want it to show up in the individual toolpath. Then I'm going to go to the attribute title, and that's going to be speed. Then I get into my select strings. And these are literally the things I'm going to be clicking on. So I want the first one to say off. I want this off by default. Okay, and then I want my second attribute string to say high speed. Okay, so those are my two options. I either have off or high speed. Kind of go or no go. Okay. And then I'm going to go to adder default, and I want it to be 1, meaning the first selection is the default, in my case off. I want it off by default. Okay. Lastly, adder used. This is just whether or not it compiles it. Okay, if I set this to add or used equals 0, it's going to ignore it while it's compiling. And then lastly, add or end. Okay, it just ends the attribute. So now I've created this custom attribute. Okay, now what I need to do is put that attribute into my source file in the pertinent places. The first thing I have to do is go back to my source file here, go back to the Phoenix 6M source file. I'm going to expand out my operation types, and you'll see the different operation types. Now, I don't want to apply this to drilling cycles. I don't see a need to add high-speed machining options to drilling cycles, but milling cycles can definitely help from this. So for each one of these milling cycles, these oper IDs, I'm going to add a new list item. Oper list equals high speed, my variable. Okay, and I'm going to add that to each one of the oper IDs. Okay, so I'm just going to copy and paste that into all 4 of these. That way it shows up no matter what type of milling operation I'm doing, whether it be a boss or a pocket or any of those things. Okay, so now that I've added that attribute to the oper IDs, now I can actually program it into my code, or where it's going to show up in my code. So I'm going to go into the sections, and you'll see initial tool change mill. I'm going to write, again, just below the tool command, I'm going to write :T:, brackets in, if high speed, type, speed equals 2, then G5 P10000. Okay. Then I have to end the if-then statement with an end if. Okay. And then lastly, end of line. Okay. Have to have the end of line in. So that's my logic. I'm saying if the high speed option is set to 2, which is high speed on, then post a G5 P10000. Okay. If the high speed is set to 1, it's just going to ignore this. So now what I'm going to do is go ahead and copy this, and I'll paste it into the subtool change as well. I don't want it just in the initial tool change, but also the subtool change. Okay. So you'll see now it's below the tool change line in both sections. So now that I've got that, I'm going to go ahead and save it, and now we can compile. And now if I did this right, I'll go File, Compile, Source, it should just compile successfully. There we go. Post source compiled successfully. Okay, so now that I've compiled it, I can test it. So I'm going to go back into CamWorks, and just like I did before, I'm going to go into my machine and refresh the post. I'm going to browse, go into my new post file, and select it. And what I want to do is I want to add this new high-speed contouring option that I've created to this particular contour mill. And like I said before, my whole goal in this is I want this to be an option in the interface. I want it to be a push-down button that I can select and say, okay, turn on these particular commands. And to do that, I had to add it to the posting tab. So if I double-click the contour mill, you'll notice that anything I added shows up on this posting tab, including the speed attribute that I created. Okay, and now you'll see under speed, the default is set to off, but if I hit the drop down, there's an option there for high speed. Okay, and so that's essentially what I created. I created the speed attribute, and then I gave it 2 options, off and high speed. Notice it's off by default, which is what I want. I don't want this to be an on option all the time. I just want to be able to turn it on when needed. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and set this to high speed. Go ahead and hit OK, and now I can post this. Now if you remember, there was nothing between the tool change command, T whatever M6, and my spindle command. Now if I did this right, it should show up right between those two. So I'm going to go ahead and yes, and we'll take a look at that. And so now you'll notice between the tool change command and the spindle command is my G5 P10000. Okay, and so that's really what I've accomplished here. To recap, let's go back here. I added an attribute of high-speed machining to the general lib file. Then I went back to the source file and added that oper list to each oper ID. So I added high speed to each operation ID. Okay, then I went into the individual section that I wanted to see this command and created an if-then statement calling it up. Okay, so in my initial tool change, I said if the high speed high speed is set to 2, then call up the G5P10000 command. Okay, and again I added it to the subtool change as well. And so now it's an available option when I'm setting up toolpath in CamWorks. Okay, so that's pretty much what I had planned. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to email support@ddicad.com. And thank you for joining.